Let me know. That's great. Looks like we are now being recorded. So again, welcome. And the admissions team at the University of Washington School of Medicine is really happy to have you join us today for the E-22 Admissions Cycle Essentials webinar. First, I'd like to start with just introducing you to the admissions team members that are joining us today. I'm Leanna Muskie. I use she, her pronouns. I am a member of the Salish and Kootenai tribes of the Flathead Indian Reservation in Montana. I'm a family physician and an E-96 graduate of the Montana WWAMI program, and I'm also the Associate Dean for Admissions for the School of Medicine. And I would like to have my team members introduce themselves. We'll start with Sarah.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Sarah, and I use she, her pronouns.
Sonia.
Hey, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am Sonia, and I also use she, her pronouns.
And Rebale.
Hello, everybody. I'm Rebale, and I use she, her pronouns.
Thanks, team. As I said, we're very excited to have you join us today. You can see that each of us holds a title, but we really work as a team to help make admissions happen at the University of Washington School of Medicine. So that's why we didn't describe exactly what we do, because everybody does a little bit of everything on the admissions team at UW. You'll also probably notice in the panelists that we have another person joining us today. Eileen is helping us with our closed captioning. She won't be doing any of the presentation, but if you're wondering who the other person is, that's who's with us today. I would like to take a moment to acknowledge that the land upon which we, are currently situated is the traditional home of the Tulalip, Muckleshoot, Duwamish, and Suquamish tribal nations. We know that without them, we would not have access to this working, teaching, and learning environment, and we humbly take the opportunity to thank the original caretakers of the land who are still here. Being that this is a virtual event, I would also encourage you to take a moment to reflect, wherever you might be, who the original stewards of the land that you are sitting on might be, and acknowledge and honor those people. If you're interested in learning more about how to actively honor those of the Duwamish Nation, you can go to the website that is listed at realrentduwamish.org. So just a bit of a reminder or an acknowledgement that we do have closed captioning available for today's webinar. In order to enable the subtitles for this live webinar, you'll just need to click on the closed caption button you'll see at the bottom right of the screen as you're viewing, and then you'll select the show subtitle and view full transcript options underneath the closed captioning button. And again, our colleague is here helping us with that today. Please keep in mind that this is our, as we strive to be more inclusive and reach audiences further, this is one of the first times we'll actually have closed captioning. So we appreciate your patience, and any feedback as you observe this webinar would be greatly appreciated. So, we really have been trying to reach our audiences in a broad fashion with, sort of using more of our virtual availability. And what we realized was that we had some specific webinars for audiences with specific topics, but that we hadn't really spent a lot of time helping prospective applicants and current applicants understand the process and the logistics. So today, that's really what we're here to do. So in a minute, I'll go over the goals of today and what we're hoping you'll get out of today. We'll provide to you some of the updates that are very specific to the E-22 admission cycle. And then we'll kind of walk you through the process and provide some essential information that's very important for you to know as you navigate your way through this process. we do recognize that every school is unique, and for us, we recognize also that our admissions process may actually have more nuance and more complicated and complicating factors to it, because we are a 5-state regional medical school, and we have multiple cohorts that we're trying to sort of assess and process the applications for. So we recognize that this can be confusing, and we really wanted to be able to share some of our specific nuances around the process with you today. So that is what you have in store for today. So just to review some of the goals, what we hope you'll get out of today's session and that you'll leave with a better understanding of is our specific application process. Again, we have many, sort of unique features and nuances that do, and we want you to understand that a little bit better, that do require some specific attention. So we're going to review that. We want you to sort of on the basic level, understand how to apply, what WWAMI means, what a specific cohort means, et cetera, et cetera. So you'll learn about that. Again, the changes and the updates for our upcoming cycle in E-22. And please know the information contained today is all very much specific to the E-22 cycle, because as you're very well aware, the world can change in the blink of an eye with the advent of things like a pandemic that we've all just been, sort of living through. We are trying to plan for future cycles, but know that the information contained today is very specific to the E-22 cycle. And we'll also review our deadlines that we feel are important for folks to know as they go through the process. What you won't get today are things about specific advice around how to do either your application or preparing for your interview, what to expect. The specifics around sort of the substance there, you can find those. We've done different presentations. We have resources on our website, which is listed at the bottom of this slide. You can also send us questions specific to your situation, but though that is not our goal today. Our goal really today is about the nuts and bolts and the logistics of the application process for us and for the WWAMI region specifically. And also know that we have some things coming in the future too that may be speaking specifically to the actual, sort of what kinds of things should be in my application, what are good experiences, where can I go to learn more about that. So that will be coming. We also have many, many resources on our webpage, but that's not the goal of today. We want to acknowledge that we did ask you to provide questions in advance. We've tried to address the logistical questions today that we received. Some of the more specific situational questions and what are the best practices, what are the best things to do for this part or that part, again, will be addressed in either presentations we've already done, presentations coming in the future, or we have many resources on our webpage. So please look for those there. So if you don't hear the specific answer to your question today, perhaps that would be the reason why. So we encourage you to go check out some of those other resources. With that, because our process can be a little bit unique and has a lot of alphabet soup that goes along with it, we thought we would start off by helping you understand some of those terms. And I'm going to turn to my team member, Sonia, to help guide you through the next few slides.
Yeah. Hi, everyone again. So we definitely know we are a school full of acronyms, and there are more than we could ever probably even remember and put on this slide, but we sort of tried to cull them down into the ones that we're going to talk about today and that might be confusing for people. So the first is just that we call the people who are applying right now in summer, fall of 2021, the E-22 class. So it's the entering class of 2022. So those are people who are starting in or hope to start in fall of 2022. Know that we actually do that throughout our whole school and for graduates. You notice that Dr. Muski announced her, or when she introduced herself, said she was an E-96 graduate. Some schools we know refer to their cohorts in the graduating class. We do it for when you started. So know that that is just sort of the way we talk about it. Hopefully the next two you are familiar with, the AAMC and AMCAS, which is the AAMC is the sort of overhead institution, and they AMCAS runs underneath them. But know that the AAMC have incredible amount of resources on their website. So that's sort of why one of the reasons we wanted to bring them up is they really do have, we're talking about everything that is super nitty gritty about our application process. They have sort of how to apply to medical school in general. What are schools looking for? How do you, what does residency look like? What do different specialties look like? So we encourage everybody to check out their resources if you haven't already. AMCAS is the actual application service that you will use to apply to almost all of the medical schools in the country. We know that some of them are not on that system, like Texas and your DO programs, but that is how you'll submit your application to us. It's how you submit your application to most schools. It's a common application. The next there is, we will talk about this, and the important thing to remember here with the science GPA. So BCPM stands for biology, chemistry, physics, and math GPA. And the sort of important thing to remember is that that is determined by AMCAS. So we get a lot of, when you fill in the classes in your application, we get a lot of questions about how do you calculate this class as math or this class as science or not? Those questions go to AMCAS. Those classes are pre-populated. The GPA is pre-populated when it comes to the medical schools. So if any school is filtering off of the undergrad GPA or the BCPM GPA, that is where that information comes from. So that's important to know. Next up, we have CASPER, which is a situational judgment test. And the company that runs that is called Altus. The important thing to know here is that it is required for our process. So any of our applicants who want to move forward in our process are required to take CASPER. You are not required to do the other parts of the Altus suite. So they are new this year. There are two other pieces called Duet and Snapshot, and those are, we're not looking at them. So if other schools are asking you to do it, or the Altus is saying it's required, that is all okay, but it doesn't come to us. So we are only looking at CASPER. And the goal there really, because we get questions about this, is why are you using CASPER? The goal is to get sort of some sense of the other competencies that medical schools are looking for that are not sort of easily accessible by other standardized tests. So it's sort of to determine, how you would react in a certain situation, right? That's very important to know for physicians, that people sort of have a reasonable and calm and equity-minded way of dealing with different situations. Next up, the MCAT. If you're applying now, you probably know what that is, a standardized test for applying to medical school. MSTP is the MD PhD program, and know that our office, the Office of Admissions at the UW School of Medicine, is for the MD program, and we have a separate Office of Admissions for our MSTP folks. So just know that if you ask us a question, we might be able to answer it, but we might forward you on to their office. Next, out of region. So this is a big one. We're going to talk about it in a couple of slides about what that actually means. But for us, we are a regional medical school. So the in-state for us is not just Washington. It is residents of Washington, Wyoming, Alaska, Montana, and Idaho. And if you're not a legal resident of one of those states, you are out of region. So that's everybody else who's applying. Those are sort of the two categories. And we get this question a lot because the MSAR, which is compiled by AMCAS the data isn't necessarily obvious there that it is what is in state versus out of state, because we do accept, according to them, quite a few out of state students, but those are people who are, for the most part, WWAMI students, which is for us in region. Trust there is one of the many programs that our medical students can do. The reason we highlighted it here is because it's part of the secondary application. So it's the only one that has a separate application process besides the MD PhD program. And the last two there, I hope you know, the UW School of Medicine, UW SOM is us, and we are sort of synonymous with WWAMI. So WWAMI is the regional partnership between the 5 states that I mentioned a minute ago. All right, so moving on to sort of just the highlights of the things that are different for E-22. And some of these were also true in the last cycle, E-21, but just sort of things for people to be very aware of. The number one question we're getting right now, the MCAT continues to be optional for first-time test takers for this cycle. So this was what we did last year also. I will say that the majority of our applicants did take the MCAT, so know that, because to apply broadly to medical school, you will probably need to take the MCAT because most schools are not waiving it. Something that is different for this year is we are requiring that if an applicant is not taking the MCAT, they need to declare that they are not doing so sort of at the beginning of their time applying to us. So if you submit your AMCAS application and it has no future test date listed, we will send you, we will say, great, it looks like you're not taking the MCAT. You need to fill out this form that says, I agree that I'm not taking the MCAT. And if I change my mind in 2 months, I understand that I'm not going to be considered further by the UW School of Medicine. And the reason we're doing that is really because it was very logistically challenging for us, honestly, last year, for people to sort of pop in and out of the process with an MCAT and with or without an MCAT. So it is, this is our way of saying, if you feel that it is not safe for you to take the MCAT, we totally understand that and we want to honor that, but you need to let us know and move through the process with no MCAT. On the flip side, if you are someone who is planning to take the MCAT right now, and you submit your application with a future test date listed, and you eventually decide not to take it, that is okay. You'll just get the form at a later time. So if you say you're going to take the test on August 2nd, and we don't get a score from you, then we will say, it looks like you didn't take the MCAT on August 2nd. You can now fill out the form and tell us that you're continuing through the process with no MCAT. So that's sort of how we're managing it. Again, we know this is very different than what other schools are doing. So it's something that you'll probably need to ponder a lot about how you want to proceed. Do know that, again, this is the same as last year. If you have an MCAT score, period, from at any point in the historical past, our committee can see it. So this is only relevant for people who have never taken the MCAT before. If you have an MCAT, it will be considered as part of your holistic review of your application. Something that is the same as last year, but we wanted to highlight it for everyone. We are going to be doing virtual interviews again this cycle. We feel it went really well last year. We got a lot of positive feedback from applicants, especially about just being grateful that they didn't have to put themselves in harm's way to travel, that it did, save them quite a bit of money to do that, and sort of allowed them to apply to more schools and really learn more about different places without having to sort of fly all around the country, which we certainly can appreciate. And from our committee's perspective, it went really well too. We felt like we really got to know the applicants, although we missed seeing everybody in person for sure. Also, same as last year, we are waiving the secondary fee again. We know that sort of while the pandemic might be on the upswing. We certainly hope that it is. We know that the economic repercussions are still very much there for people. So we have waived the secondary fee. So anyone who's invited to complete the secondary can go through the process without paying that $35, which is what our fee used to be. Something else new for this cycle, we have a new question in the secondary application about the pandemic, sort of how it affected you or patients you've worked with or your family is sort of the idea there. It's replacing the autobiographical statement on the secondary. For those of you who are reapplicants, the very first question on the secondary used to just say, tell us a little bit more about yourself, basically. And this question is replacing that one. It will go on our website very soon. It'll probably be up there in a week or two. We have written it, just isn't on the website yet. Another new thing is that for those of you who are Washington applicants, there has always been the option as part of the secondary to select a foundation site campus. So foundations is perhaps something we should have put on the glossary. Now I'm thinking about that, but it is the preclinical time at our institution. So the first 15 to 18 months, depending on how you are looking at the calendar. And every other cohort of applicants is automatically assigned to a specific foundation site, but our Washington applicants have the choice to choose between Seattle and Spokane. And in the past, there have been an option to choose a variety of options. I prefer one, but I'm okay with the other, for example, or I have no preference between the two. This year, there's just going to be two options, Seattle or Spokane. And that will determine where you interview and then sort of which cohort you're considered for as part of acceptance. So again, for something for reapplicants to be aware of that is different and something you might have to think about differently if you're applying this year. Lastly, on this slide, it's feels like a very far away from now because this is happening sort of now for the people who are accepted right now. But we have a curriculum change coming up for this E-22 class. And that one of parts of it is that the classes are starting earlier. So classes are going to start in July, which means that our commit to enroll deadline, which is part of the AMCAS Choose Your Medical School tool, will be earlier. So this year it's in July, it's going to move to June. We will post that date when we have it solidified. It'll probably be solidified in the next few months, so people will be aware of it. All right, so moving on to our timeline here. These are sort of the most important things to keep in mind, the most common questions that we get. And I would say the thing to sort of highlight at the get-go is that we get a lot of questions about what rolling admissions means for our program. And again, we understand that's different at every school. So rolling admissions, even a phrase that lots of schools use, is not the same everywhere. So for us, it means that while we do accept people starting in October, we hold seats open through the whole cycle until we've interviewed everyone that we want to interview. So while it is advantageous to you to submit before the deadline, it is not imperative for you to apply on the first day, for example. We get a lot of questions about that. Those of you who have not already submitted your application are not late, don't worry. We know that there's a lot of pieces that go into your application and you want them to be good, and having a good application is better than an early application, certainly. Know that paperwork and logistics do factor into a lot of these different deadlines. And so that's why we always say, it's really not great to apply on the last day. If you are someone who applies on the last day, we always take people who apply on the last day. So it doesn't rule you out, but it does sometimes get people into trouble because of your transcript didn't make it in time to AMCAS. Your letter writers didn't submit when they said they would, for example. So it's just good to sort of know when the deadlines are. but you don't have to submit on the first day in order to be competitive. That's not how we run our process. So an important thing, I mentioned Casper before, and it is really important to let everyone know that it is required for our program. And there are two different deadlines for out-of-region applicants and for WWAMI applicants. And that is because out-of-region applicants have additional screening processes that they go through. And Rebecca is going to talk about that in just a minute, but their processing time is a lot longer. And so the deadline is earlier. It is before the primary application deadline, the same as the MCAT. So the deadlines for those are both in September. So if you are thinking about applying this year, make sure that you take those so that we have those scores and can consider you for admission to our program. The Casper deadline for WWAMI is a little bit later, but again, the earlier you get that in, the better, because you can't move through and start to be reviewed with the secondary application until those scores are in. Other things to highlight on here, you guys know the MCAT, if you're taking it, the last day to take it is September 30th, but again, not required for first-time test takers. The primary application in AMCAS is open now, and the deadline to submit to our program is October 15th. Again, that's a one where people get themselves into trouble with paperwork. So I would say it is not advisable to try to submit that at the last minute. We always have people writing to us on October 16th saying, I submitted it at 12:01, or I thought it was Eastern time or Pacific time, or those sorts of things. Don't let time zones stop you from applying to medical school. Then the secondary application, we start sending out to applicants once we get the AMCAS data, usually in sort of anywhere between mid-July to the beginning of August. So if you have already submitted, you just have to wait to hear something from us. Don't worry, people don't need to call and ask, I haven't heard anything. Is there a problem? I know it's been delivered to your school. We have a lot of updates that go into our system, and we will start, sending out the floodgates when we send the floodgates, but you won't be behind because everyone will get it at the same time who applied sort of on the early side. The last day to submit the secondary is December 1st. But again, advisable to submit before that if you can. And then interviews and decisions, we start interviewing in October for the Seattle cohort and interview through January for the Seattle cohort. And then the regional interviews happen from November to February. And decisions depend on each cohort, essentially. That's sort of, we could start taking people as early as the 15th, but all the acceptances and the alternate list decisions will be out by the end of February. And the last deadline on there is just sort of something to keep in mind for the future, long way from now. But the AMCAS deadline for narrowing your program down to one acceptance is April 30th of each year. And I'm going to pass this on to Rebecca now.
Thank you. So we get these types of questions a lot and just wanted to clear up some of the confusion surrounding these things. So the UW School of Medicine and WWAMI are actually the same thing. When you are applying to the UW School of Medicine, you don't need to apply to the WWAMI program separately. WWAMI is the region, it's the acronym for the region that we serve. It stands for Washington, Wyoming, Alaska, Montana, and Idaho. I know we went over this in the glossary, but it's just important to keep in mind as well. In AMCAS, when you are applying to us, you are just selecting the University of Washington School of Medicine. Your legal state of residence defines your cohort. So if you are from Idaho, you will only be considered for the Idaho WWAMI class and cannot be considered for more than one cohort. Washington applicants have the opportunity to choose between Seattle and Spokane for your foundations phase. And we recommend doing your research beforehand to see which one you'd like to be considered for. These are completely separate cohorts. They have their own interview process. Whichever site you select is where you're going to interview and the only cohort that you will be considered for. And then out of region applicants and MSDP applicants are also part of the Seattle cohort. And on the right, you can kind of see a breakdown of the seats in each cohort, which is nice to see, nice to keep in mind. And I don't know if anybody has anything else to add, but if not, we can move on to the next slide. Yeah, so for out of region applicants, since the UW School of Medicine is a 5-state regional school, admissions for out of region applicants are incredibly competitive. On average, we accept about 0.3% of our out of region applicants. And in this past admission cycle in E-21, we accepted even less than that, just 0.1% of out of region applicants. And that is from a little over 82% of applications that we get that are from out of region, which I hope just puts into perspective how competitive it really is, the whole process. And we have a stricter and longer review process. Sonia kind of touched on this, which is why the deadlines are earlier. So a small percentage are invited to complete a mission statement, which is an additional part. And then they will be invited to complete the secondary application after that. We do not consider ties to the WWAMI region when reviewing out of region applicants. And whether you are considered a WWAMI applicant is dependent on your legal state of residence in AMCAS. And we only consider out of region applicants who come from a disadvantaged background themselves or have exemplary service to underserved communities, which is part of that mission statement that goes out before the secondary application as well. And then before I go into the academic cutoffs, I just wanted to talk about why academics matter. So at the UW School of Medicine, we're committed to holistic review, and your academics are just a portion of that. We look at academics to see if you are prepared for the rigors of our course load, and we've come to these numbers based on historical data. If you're a WWAMI applicant, you can always appeal if you have higher metrics in your postbac work. So our cutoffs for WWAMI for your undergraduate GPA and BCPM GPA is greater than 3.0. For MCAT, it's higher than 498. For out of region, it's an undergraduate GPA that's higher than 3.25 and a BCPM GPA that's higher than 3.0. And for your MCAT, an MCAT that's higher than 500. And if your metrics fall below these cutoffs, you will not be invited to complete a secondary application. So if you do receive a secondary, just know that you have met all these cutoffs. Yeah. And so our state residency verification process, notoriously very complicated and something we get a lot of questions about. So applicants from Idaho, Wyoming, Alaska, and Montana will need to verify their state residency, and Washington applicants will be sent a residency form which determines whether you will need to verify your state residency. It doesn't hurt your application at all if you're asked to verify, and it can take anywhere from 4 to 8 weeks after you submit your paperwork to be verified. Patience is really key, and responding promptly with all the items requested makes the process go significantly faster. Our office actually works concurrently with the residency office to help move everything along and help process information. But I only mentioned that to say that our office does not get the final say on who qualifies, and the residency office ultimately makes that decision. And please note that the UW School of Medicine also does not set these residency requirements. These are requirements that are based on state legislation. And another thing to keep in mind is for Washington applicants, there is a new state law that may change some of the residency requirements that our office is monitoring closely, and we recommend just staying up to date with on our website and our social media if we have any updates and changes to our process. And yeah, so just make sure you check your email respond with all the things that we ask for, just makes the whole process a lot smoother.
Can I hop in here just for a quick second?
Yeah, for sure.
Sorry, Bill. I realized in the timeline slide, I apologize for sort of forgetting to mention this. I had planned to. So I thought it was a good place to mention it here, that the state residency verification is part of this secondary application. So you will get instructions on what you need to do based on your cohort and your situation as sort of part of that secondary. And the other pieces of the secondary, this is the piece I forgot to sort of include, is just that that's when we look at letters of recommendation, the Casper scores, the MCAT scores, the trust application if you are applying to trust, and also the state residency if that is applicable to you. So if you're one of the single W whammy, so Wyoming, Alaska, Montana, and Idaho applicants, or a Washington applicant who is required to verify as part of their process, that is when we ask, that is when we collect all that. All that is due on or before December 1st.
Thanks, Sonia. And I would just like to say that what Rabail said is so true. The residency verification process can be a little bit complicated and tricky, and it's kind of the details that matter. And I just wanted to point out that for the single W whammy, the Wyoming, Alaska, Montana, and Idaho, that is done in your own state, the residency verification. And each state has a unique process for that. So we do have information about that is linked on our webpage. So it's very important that you go to that website and look to see what the recommendations are, or the requirements are for your individual state and your cohort.
So now moving on to the next phase, once you're, when we're reviewing an application, we're going to be, we want to make sure that you know that we don't accept any updates except grade updates. The idea behind that is we want, it's really important to us that all applicants are reviewed equitably. So we want everyone to be reviewed using the same information, that is the application and the interview. But that doesn't mean that if you haven't done new and cool things since you initially submitted your application, that can't be included, right? Because you can mention it at your interview. So let's say you submit in July and then are interviewed in January, you're welcome to tell your interview panel all the new and cool things you've learned in the last 6 months. But we just don't accept that as a written paper document. The coursework, your prerequisites have to be done prior to, for the E-22 cycle, have to be done prior to May 15th of next year. We actually recommend that you complete your prerequisites before you apply, so have everything completed and then submit your application. But if you do have a couple classes that you need to complete, or some classes that you need to complete, you can do that during the application year. The screening process. So after the screening happens, this screening that I'm talking about happens after you've submitted all of your secondary materials and your application is considered complete. And you will get an email from us to let you know that your application is complete. We wanted to highlight here that our screeners are randomly assigned, and how this process works has nothing to do with competitiveness or things like your with all your individual pieces. It's random because our screeners are real people. They're volunteers. Many of them are practicing physicians, and they do a holistic review. That means reading every single piece of the application, your AMCAS application, your secondary and all your essays, all the letters you've submitted, reviewing all of your coursework. And that is, they don't just look at the GPA. We're talking, they look at all the grades over the course of your academic career, and they're taking this all into consideration when screening, which means it takes some time to do that work. And at least 2 people review every application. So we get a lot of questions about this, but just know that, I mean, 2 people can submit on the same day and hear back at different times. And it doesn't mean that there's any significant difference between the 2 applications. It just has to do with the randomness of the screening assignments, right? So whichever physician or volunteer screener gets that application and how quickly they're able to review it and return it to us. So just keep that in mind and be patient during that screening process, and we will email you with the result of that. Just, and as a reminder too, that we talk a lot about this in our other resources about holistic review and what that means, but the committee is looking at all the different pieces of your application. So if you're ultimately not invited to interview, it's never just one thing, right? That it's not like, oh, if only I'd had a slightly higher MCAT score, if only I had done that one extra experience. They're taking everything into account. If your application is complete and you're not offered an interview, then it means real people, at least 2 real people, have reviewed your application. So if you are offered an interview, the way it works is that once the screening process is complete, you'll get an interview that says, or an email, excuse me, that says, congratulations, we're going to interview you. But it may not immediately ask you to schedule your interview because the interview weeks happen throughout our season. So we like to, what we realized is people want to know as soon as possible that they're being offered an interview, even if we can't schedule them till later. So we do send you that email, but be patient because you will eventually get, if you have been invited, if you are going to be invited to interview, you will eventually get an email that gives you instructions on how to find a date for that interview. But we do appreciate your patience because it's a real person that does it. It's not a machine, and we have hundreds of interviews to schedule. So it can be, it can take some time, but watch your email and respond promptly when you get it. And as we note here, the interview weeks are predetermined, especially for all sites. We have specific interview weeks, and some sites may even have 1 or 2 interview weeks total. So those are going to be posted on our website. It's important to note those dates in advance and make sure you have availability during your interview week. Even if you haven't been scheduled for your exact day, you know that you're going to get an email that says, schedule an interview during this week. So please have thought about that in advance. As Sonia had said, our virtual interview season went really well last year for both applicants and the committee. So we are doing that again. We do have resources for preparing for your interview on our website, so you can review that. And the format of the interview has actually not changed considerably. So the resources that are on our website are still relevant. We're still doing a 3-person panel interview in 30 minutes, and it's just that now it's virtual instead of in person. But our committee really felt like they were able to get to know the applicants well, and the applicants felt really good about the experience too. We really think it's important to have multiple perspectives on our interview panel, which is why we strive to have 3 committee members in each interview. Sometimes things happen, especially with our physician interviewers. Sometimes they're called into surgery at the last minute, and or for some other reason, your interview may only have 2 committee members. That's okay. It still works in our process. We have looked at the research and it doesn't hurt applicants. So if that situation does happen to you, don't be concerned outright, because we really do take equity into account in this whole process, and we will be, and that's an okay part of it. And one thing to note too at the end, we mentioned that if something happens in the interview that's inappropriate, and we want you to let us know right away. So we want to be able to manage that situation as quickly as possible. It's important to reach out to us right away. When you are invited to interview, we're going to give you all the information about how to contact us in lots of different ways. So please reach out as soon as you can. We have both direct and anonymous feedback opportunities to let us know if something happened. Although we can only help you in your situation if you let us know directly and let us know and don't use the anonymous form. And lastly, the decisions. This is the happy one, right? So we won't ghost you. We always send an email about where you are in the process. So make sure you're monitoring your email and that if you're going to be away and out of service, that you have a designated person monitoring your email account because you don't want to miss an important email from us. We, as I mentioned before, equity is really important to us. So we only make the decisions based on that application and the interview. And so letters of intent, thank you notes to the interviewers, all those things are not accepted. And when those final decisions go out, it is final. So we're not able to change or accept appeals or anything after those final decisions have been made. And we do make those decisions and send those emails from October all the way through February. And the exact timing does depend on your cohort. So you'll want to look on our website and find out when the interview weeks for each cohort are. We don't have an early decision program. We have the process as Sonia laid out is how it works. It's the same for everyone. And due to the AMCAS traffic rules, we do not accept any applicant who selects commit to enroll at another institution in the Choose Your Medical School tool on AMCAS. So, and that happens, there are instructions on that tool and what that looks like available on the AAMC website. And that is outside, so that Choose Your Medical School is not in our system, that is in the AMCAS system. We do see those results and we remove you from consideration if you choose to commit to enroll elsewhere. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Sarah, and thanks to all of the team members who've walked you all through various aspects of our application process and specifically what's happening in the E-22 cycle, because we have really been dedicated to paying attention to what's going on in the world and paying attention to what applicants are experiencing and telling us and trying to adjust our process while still maintaining the integrity and the fairness and equity that is so important to us within the admissions process at UW. So thank you for walking us through some of the logistics. Hopefully that answered many of your questions today. Again, I know that many of you submitted questions that had to do more specifically about your application or how to sort of do this or that, or what the best way to do this, or how does one get experience. And hopefully, like we've tried to implore to you today, that there are other resources available to really get into the nitty-gritty about around those details. A few other things that we thought it was important for you to know or for us to re-emphasize was just that all of the communication that we have with our applicants comes via email. There is an applicant portal within our application processing system that's really important for our applicants to become, sort of familiar with and to respond to. That's how we know sort of what the intention of our applicants is for each individual. So it's important to read emails, to understand the specifics, and to be responsive. And I will just say, as a practicing physician, that part doesn't go away once you get into medical school and beyond into your career. So it's a good habit to develop if you haven't already, of just, having a system of checking in with your email and being able to respond and react to those communications. I think this was said earlier, you don't necessarily need to submit on the first day. We want you to submit your application when you're ready and when you're prepared and when you feel like you've adequately and appropriately and effectively been able to tell your story with your application. So don't feel the pressure, and this is specific to the UW School of Medicine. Do not feel the pressure to submit on the very first day because it's the first day and you feel like that's somehow going to give you an advantage. Because if you've not had a chance to really review or had other people review it, and it's submitted, sort of incomplete or with mistakes, or maybe after you read it a week later and you realize, boy, I wish I would have said something differently, that's not possible. So you do have a little bit of time. We certainly want you to submit before the deadline, as was stated earlier too. Don't wait until the last minute, but you certainly don't have to be first in line. And again, don't apply if you're not ready. That's probably one of the things. So we try to give feedback to applicants who were disappointed in the process and were not ultimately accepted. And one of the more common sort of discoveries I think we make with the applicants is that they probably applied too soon. They weren't quite ready. They weren't understanding exactly what they were getting into, or they just hadn't had enough life or clinical experiences, those sorts of things. Don't feel the pressure and rush to apply. And particularly, I think it's really important to do some self-reflection around, we have made a commitment to waive the MCAT, and that came after a lot of discussion around what is the rationale for that. And it really is about, because we're trying to ensure that our process takes into consideration health and safety of our applicants. At the time we had to make the decision, it was there was much more uncertainty in the world. We had decided to do virtual interviews, and by that we deduced if we're having people not come to our institution because of the uncertainty of where we'll be in the pandemic, it didn't make sense for us to expect people to go to testing centers and into public and potentially expose themselves or their family members. At the time, there was uncertainty. We are excited to, sort of see what's happening across the country, but we recognize that for individuals, the risk still may be high. So we made that decision with that in mind. But we recognize that for some applicants, the MCAT is a very important part of your application. It does help you demonstrate, where you are academically. Perhaps those of us who, start off a little rocky in our undergraduate career, whose GPA isn't, going to maybe make it above that threshold, or maybe doesn't adequately reflect our abilities currently. So really, we really strongly encourage you to not apply just because you don't want to take the MCAT. There is value to it. We understand that, but we also want that to be your decision in terms of how you present yourself as an applicant. With that, we also have always and will always continue to recommend to you to apply to more than one medical school if in fact your ultimate goal is to be a physician. Medical school application is, the process is a beast, as you may be finding out. And it's very competitive, and if you were paying attention at all in this past year, you'll realize that we had a record number of applicants to the same number of medical schools across the country. So I don't anticipate that it's going to get any less competitive moving forward. And our experience showed us that people came very prepared and ready. And we, wish we had room for all of the wonderful applicants that we met along the way this past application cycle, but we just don't, and that's true of all medical schools. So, and there is a little bit of, sort of, I think, luck or serendipity in terms of how your application travels through our process. So don't set yourself up to, sort of be at risk by only applying to one school of medicine, medical school across the country. Do some research, find out what programs may also additionally fit you, and apply to more than one school. If you have a future MCAT date, you can still submit your primary and secondary applications, but just let us know that you have a future date that you're planning to take the MCAT. That helps us know where you are in the process. Because again, as Sonia had described, we are actually, if people are waiving their the choice to take the MCAT, then we're asking you to tell us that up front. That allows your application to actually move forward in the process. If you have a future date, we hold it until we see that you've completed your MCAT and we get that score back. So it's fine to submit everything. We want you to do that in a timely fashion. We just need to know, we're asking our applicants to be in more communication with us in terms of what your status is, what is your plan going forward, so we know where to put you in terms of moving your application through. So that is totally acceptable to submit everything ahead of your MCAT, and we'll just hold it until we get that information. Interestingly, you should note that, you know, sort of for folks who are legal residents of any of the 5 WWAMI states, you can be considered for both the MD and the MSTP programs separately, as Sonia had mentioned earlier. Also, those are 2 separate admissions processes. They have different admissions committees and requirements and so forth and so on. So you'll need to research that, but you can apply to both of the programs if you are from one of the WWAMI states. But if you're from out of region, you have to decide whether you're applying to us through the MD program or to the MSTP program. That's just the way that the system is set up. And finally, just a reminder that hopefully if you're applying to the E-22 cycle, you've already been working on this and perhaps have those letters lined up already. But we encourage you to make sure that you ask letters of recommendation from a variety of people who know you well and can speak to different aspects about you. This does get a little bit into the advice kind of topics, but we get this question a lot, and there is some concern or question about who should the letter writers be, and we do not require that a letter come from a science professor or really any specific sort of kind of person. We really encourage you to be thoughtful about selecting your letter writers. Ensure that you ask them to write specifically about how they know you and how they can speak to your strengths, and make sure that they can honestly give you a you know, sort of a positive review in their letter. But just make sure that we just wanted to be sure that you knew that it doesn't have to be a science professor or any specific sort of person. I just will call on my team really quickly to see if there's anything else we've thought of along the way or that we may have forgotten to include of other important things to know.
I think the most important things are the ones that are about to come up on the next slide, like how to get more resources and how to contact us.
Perfect. So yeah, that's the end of the formal sort of presentation material we had for you today. As Sarah said, I think what we really try to do when we get inquiries, perhaps this has been your experience, but we really do try to redirect you to some of our, you know, sort of digital resources, because there's a ton of information available. We try to be as up to date and transparent with our process and inclusive of the information we think really can help our applicants become confident that they're submitting an application that demonstrates who they are and that ensures their preparedness. So you can always, if you have a specific question, you can always email us at the email address listed at the top of this slide, which is askuwsom@uw.edu. We would strongly encourage you to follow us on some social media pages, including our Facebook and Instagram pages. That's where you're going to find sort of some of the information that may be more acute, more up to date. We often post information about sessions like this. Perhaps that's how you got to us today. Or other interesting related either articles or opportunities for you to enhance your application or learn more about the process or perhaps participate in some programs. So for sure, try to find us and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. We also have a YouTube channel where webinars like this will be cataloged and posted, so you can find more sessions around different topics that we have included there. We're we're on the uphill sort of side of getting all of our information to our YouTube page, and soon we should have a plethora of things available for you all to peruse and choose from. The other things that are very helpful that we wanted to be sure, we've mentioned this before, but the AAMC really is kind of the overarching body that is all things related to medical education. And specifically, they have an entire section dedicated to applying to medical school and the kind of things to know and some resources and how to go about that in more detail probably than we've gone into even today. So that's a very helpful website. Of course, our admissions page at the uwmedicine.org is where you'll find many of the things that we've been discussing here today, as well as many, many more additional resources, especially if you need to know something specific, like about a cohort that you're interested in, or the curriculum, or a program that you've heard about that you wanted to learn more about. There's many, many layers and other links to many, many other pages on our website. So get there soon, get there often, check back for updates. Make sure that you utilize that to the best of your ability. And that is concludes the information that we plan to share with you today. I will just look one more time to my team to see if there are any final thoughts or information that we wanted to share. Anybody? Feel free.
I don't think so, but we really appreciate you sharing your time with us. And yeah, look forward to meeting you virtually later in the season.
Excellent. Well, thank you again, everybody. This does conclude the programming for our E-22 essential information session. Again, reach out to us if you have any further questions. We wish you all the best on your journey into medicine. Be safe and be well. Take care.